Have you ever seen a baby float in a basket down a river? That sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? But that's how the story of Moses begins. Long ago, in the land of Egypt, a very special baby was born. His name was Moses, and he would grow up to talk to God and lead his people to freedom. This is his amazing true story found in the Bible. It's a story about courage, hope, and God's love for all of us. Are you ready for an adventure? Let's travel back in time to ancient Egypt, where the sun blazed hot and the Nile River flowed like a giant sparkling snake. The Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, was a powerful king. He ordered all the baby boys born to the Israelites, God's chosen people, to be thrown into the Nile. The Pharaoh feared the Israelites were growing too strong.
A mother's heart ached. She knew she had to protect her newborn son Moses. She hid him for as long as she could, but soon it became too dangerous. So she wove a basket out of reeds and made it waterproof with tar. Gently, she placed her precious baby inside. Can you imagine how much she loved her baby?
The worried mother carried the basket to the riverbank. Her heart pounded with fear and hope. With a silent prayer, she placed the basket among the reeds, where the Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, often came to bathe. The baby's sister, Miriam, hid nearby, watching and waiting, her heart full of hope.
The princess arrived at the river. She saw the basket nestled amongst the reeds and sent her maidservant to fetch it. Imagine her surprise when she opened the basket. Inside lay a tiny baby crying softly. The princess knew this was no ordinary child. He was a Hebrew baby, one of the very children her father had ordered to be cast into the river. But the princess felt compassion for the child. She knew in her heart that she had to save him. As she held the crying baby close, she decided to adopt him as her own son. Little did she know, she was holding the future deliverer of the Israelites, a boy chosen by God for a very special purpose.
Miriam, who had been watching from a distance, saw her opportunity. She bravely approached the princess and asked,
"Shall I get you a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you?"
The princess agreed, and Miriam ran to find her mother. Can you imagine the joy of Moses' mother when she was reunited with her precious baby? She was able to care for him in the Pharaoh's own palace. God had answered her prayers in a miraculous way. Moses grew up in the palace, surrounded by luxury and learning. He was raised as a prince of Egypt. But even though Moses lived in the Pharaoh's palace, he never forgot who he was and where he came from. God was watching over Moses, and he had a very special plan for his life, a plan that would change the course of history and free his people from slavery. The palace walls echoed with the sounds of laughter and music. Beautiful gardens filled with exotic flowers and sparkling fountains surrounded the palace. Moses grew tall and strong, playing under the warm Egyptian sun. He learned the ways of the Egyptians, their language, their customs, even how to read their hieroglyphs, those strange and wonderful pictures that told stories.
The princess, my adopted mother, doted on me. She treated me with love and kindness, showering me with fine clothes and delicious food. I had servants attending to my every need. I had everything a young prince could ever wish for. Yet deep in my heart, I knew I was different. My mother had secretly told me about my true heritage, about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who watched over his people, the Israelites. She told me stories of their faith, their struggles, and their hope for a land promised to them by God. These stories filled me with a longing for something more, something beyond the palace walls.
As Moses grew older, he received the finest education available. He learned mathematics, astronomy, and the art of war. He excelled in his studies, impressing his teachers with his sharp mind and quick wit.
I became a skilled charioteer, a brave soldier, and a wise scholar.
Yet, amidst the splendor and luxury, Moses couldn't ignore the plight of his own people, the Israelites. He often saw them laboring under the harsh Egyptian sun, forced to build grand monuments and cities for the Pharaoh. Their backs bent low under heavy loads, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. The contrast between his privileged life and their suffering troubled him deeply.
I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong.
The lessons from his mother about God's love and justice echoed in his heart. He began to question the ways of the Egyptians and the cruelty they inflicted upon his people. One scorching day, as Moses wandered outside the palace walls, he witnessed a scene that filled him with horror. An Egyptian overseer was brutally whipping a Hebrew slave. The cries of the poor man pierced Moses' heart.
Anger surged through me. I could no longer bear to witness such injustice. I had to act.
In a moment of fury, Moses struck down the Egyptian, concealing the body in the sand. He thought he was doing what was right, defending the helpless. Little did he know his actions had been observed.
Fear gripped me. I had taken a life, and now my own life was in danger.
The Pharaoh, upon hearing of the incident, was enraged. Moses, the prince he had raised as his own, had killed an Egyptian. The Pharaoh ordered Moses to be arrested and punished. Knowing his life was in danger, Moses fled from Egypt. He left behind the only home he had ever known, the luxury of the palace and the woman who had raised him with love. He journeyed across the desert sands, a lonely figure seeking refuge in a foreign land.
Though raised as a prince, I chose to identify with my own people, the Israelites, who were suffering under the cruel hand of slavery. I had witnessed their pain, heard their cries, and felt their despair.
He could have enjoyed the comforts of the palace, but his conscience wouldn't allow it. He chose the path of righteousness, even though it meant leaving everything behind.
Little did I know my journey into exile was part of God's greater plan, a plan to free his people and lead them to a land flowing with milk and honey.
Moses traveled for many days, the hot desert sun beating down on him. He was alone, far from the luxurious life he once knew. He finally found refuge in the land of Midian, a place of rugged mountains and wandering shepherds.
I found work tending sheep for a kind man named Jethro. Life was simple but peaceful. I spent my days under the vast desert sky, watching over the sheep, listening to the gentle bleating of lambs. As I watched the sun rise and set over the dusty plains, I had plenty of time to think. I thought about my life in Egypt, the splendor of the palace, the wisdom of the scholars, and the love of my adopted mother. But I also remembered the suffering of my own people, the Israelites, and the injustice I had witnessed. I wondered about my purpose, my destiny, and God's plan for my life.
One day, while tending Jethro's sheep, Moses came across an astonishing sight. There, in the middle of the desert, a bush blazed with fire. But strangely, the bush was not consumed by the flames. It seemed to burn without being burned.
Curiosity overcame me. I cautiously approached the burning bush, drawn by its mysterious glow. As I drew closer, I heard a voice calling out to me from within the flames.
"Moses, Moses," the voice boomed. Moses trembled with awe and fear.
"Here I am," I replied, shielding my eyes from the blinding light. Can you imagine hearing God's voice speaking from a burning bush? That's exactly what happened to me.
"Do not come any closer," the voice commanded. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." God was about to speak to Moses.
"I am the God of your father," the voice continued. "The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob."
Moses hid his face, overwhelmed by the presence of the Almighty. He knew he was standing on sacred ground, in the presence of the one true God.
God told me that he had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cries for help and knew their pain. God had a special mission for me, a dangerous and important mission.
"I am sending you to Pharaoh," God declared, "to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt."
Me? But I am nobody special. How can I, a simple shepherd, go to the Pharaoh and demand that he free the Israelites?
God reassured Moses, promising to be with him every step of the way. He gave Moses signs and wonders to perform, proof that he was sent by God. He even told Moses what to say to Pharaoh. God had a plan, and he had chosen Moses to carry it out. Even though Moses was afraid, he trusted God. He knew in his heart that he couldn't ignore God's call. He had been chosen for a purpose far greater than himself. a purpose that would change the course of history and free his people from slavery. With God's words echoing in his heart, Moses left Midian and began the long journey back to Egypt. He took his wife Zipporah and their sons with him, his family accompanying him on this momentous mission. Can you imagine leaving everything behind to follow God's call? Moses journeyed back to the land of his birth, not as a prince of Egypt, but as a servant of God, ready to confront the Pharaoh and demand the freedom of his people. As he traveled, Moses thought about the task ahead. He knew it wouldn't be easy to convince the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. The Pharaoh was a powerful ruler, used to getting his own way. But Moses also knew that God was with him and that gave him strength and courage. Upon arriving in Egypt, Moses, accompanied by his brother Aaron, stood before the Pharaoh. They delivered God's message.
Let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness.
The Pharaoh's heart was cold and unyielding. He looked down upon Moses and Aaron, his eyes filled with arrogance.
Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover I will not let Israel go.
The Pharaoh's words were like a slap in the face. He refused to acknowledge God's power or the suffering he was inflicting upon the Israelites. His heart had grown hard, blinded by pride and the illusion of his own importance. Section 3, Plagues upon Egypt. The Pharaoh's defiance angered God. In response, God sent a series of plagues upon Egypt, each one more devastating than the last.
The Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, turned to blood. Frogs swarmed the land, covering houses and fields.
Gnats and flies buzzed through the air, tormenting both people and animals. Livestock died from pestilence. Boils erupted on the skin of the Egyptians. Thunder roared and hail rained down, destroying crops and buildings.
The plagues were a powerful demonstration of God's might, a stark warning to the Pharaoh that he was defying the one true God.
With each plague, Moses pleaded with the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, but the Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Section 4, The Stubborn King. Despite the suffering inflicted upon his people, the Pharaoh stubbornly refused to release the Israelites. He seemed blind to the misery around him, his heart hardened against God's power and Moses' pleas.
I will not let them go. My pride and my power will not be challenged.
The Pharaoh's advisors begged him to reconsider, warning him that Egypt would be destroyed if he continued to defy God. But the Pharaoh, consumed by pride and the fear of losing his slaves, refused to listen. He had convinced himself that he was more powerful than God, a dangerous delusion that would ultimately lead to his downfall.
I am more powerful than any god. I will not yield.
The plagues were a battle between God's power and the Pharaoh's stubborn will, a battle that God would ultimately win. Section 5, A Night of Terror. Finally, God sent the 10th and most terrifying plague. He announced to Moses,
At midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits upon his throne, even to the firstborn of the maidservant who is behind the mill.
But God provided a way for the Israelites to be spared. He instructed them to sacrifice a lamb and put its blood on the doorposts of their homes. When the angel of death saw the blood, he would pass over their houses, leaving them unharmed.
This was the first Passover, a celebration of God's protection and deliverance, a celebration that continues to this day.
The Israelites followed God's instructions carefully, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Night fell upon Egypt, a night like no other. A hush fell over the land, a silence broken only by the barking of dogs and the distant cries of children. Inside their homes, the Israelites huddled together, the blood of the Passover lamb smeared on their doorposts, a sign of God's protection.
They ate their Passover meal in haste, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They knew that this night, the angel of death would visit Egypt, taking the lives of the firstborn. Can you imagine the fear and trembling they must have felt?
At midnight, a hush fell over the land, a silence so profound that it seemed to press in on them from all sides. The air grew heavy with a sense of dread. The angel of death had passed through the land, sparing the Israelites but striking down the firstborn sons of Egypt. Even the Pharaoh's own son, the heir to the throne, had not been spared. The palace, once a place of grandeur and power, was now filled with grief and despair.
The cries of mourning reached the Pharaoh's ears, piercing his heart like a sword. His pride, his arrogance, his stubborn defiance of God crumbled before the overwhelming weight of his sorrow. At last, the Pharaoh's heart was broken. He summoned Moses and Aaron. "Go, leave this place, take your people and your flocks and your herds and be gone, and bless me also."
After centuries of slavery, the Israelites were finally free. The Israelites could hardly believe their ears. The Pharaoh, who had stubbornly refused to release them, was now begging them to leave. They didn't waste a moment. With songs of joy and thanksgiving, they gathered their belongings, packed their unleavened bread, and prepared to depart from the land of their captivity.
But the Pharaoh, his heart still torn between grief and pride, was having second thoughts. He watched from his palace window as the Israelites, their voices raised in triumphant song, streamed out of the city. He had lost his slaves, his firstborn son, and now, it seemed, his power was slipping away.
The sight of the departing Israelites enraged the Pharaoh. He forgot his grief, forgot his promises to Moses, forgot the terrible price he had paid for his stubbornness. All he could see was his loss, his humiliation.
He would pursue them, he vowed, and bring them back.
Word reached Moses that the Pharaoh and his army were in hot pursuit. The Israelites, looking back and seeing the dust clouds raised by the approaching chariots, were terrified. They had escaped from the Pharaoh's clutches, only to find themselves trapped between the sea and a relentless enemy.
Don't be afraid, stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still.
But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, the Israelites' fear grew. The sound of the approaching chariots drew closer, the pounding of hooves and the rattle of armor filling the air. They were trapped, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Israelites huddled together, their hearts pounding with fear as the Egyptian chariots drew closer. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the terror that gripped their hearts. They could hear the shouts of the Egyptian charioteers urging their horses forward, their voices hungry for recapture.
Lord, we are trapped. The sea is before us and the Pharaoh's army is behind us. What are we to do?
As if in answer to his prayer, a powerful wind began to blow, whipping the waters of the Red Sea into a frenzy. The wind howled like a wild beast, its roar echoing across the desolate landscape. The Israelites watched in astonishment, a flicker of hope igniting in their hearts as the impossible began to unfold before their very eyes. The waters of the Red Sea, responding to God's command and Moses' outstretched staff, parted as if by an invisible hand. The waves rose up on either side, forming towering walls of water, their crests shimmering under the light of the full moon. A pathway, dry land appeared where moments before the sea had raged.
Forward, the Lord has made a way. Do not be afraid. Walk through the sea on dry ground.
With renewed hope and a surge of faith, the Israelites stepped onto the dry seabed, their sandals sinking into the damp sand. They walked between the towering walls of water, the waves crashing down behind them, a protective barrier between them and their pursuers. The Egyptian army charged into the seabed, but God had other plans. The walls of water crashed down upon the Egyptians, leaving no trace of the miraculous crossing. Moses led the Israelites to freedom, relying on God's guidance. He received the 10 Commandments and taught his people to live pleasing to God. His story is a testament to God's faithfulness and love.